to the Make Art Don't Starve podcast. I'm your host, Al. Unfortunately, Kelsey couldn't be here with us today, but I am joined by the photographer, Chloe Price. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi. So I am Chloe. I am 25 years old and I am a portrait, wedding and lifestyle photographer based in the UK. So I shoot families, weddings, anything commercial really, but then I also have my personal work, which is very fairy tale based, very vintage based, and that fine art kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. So I was looking at your, obviously when Kelsey told me about your work and wanted you on the podcast, I was looking at your Instagram and of course your website, and just everything is so gorgeous. I love that very whimsical fairy tale aspect. Oh my gosh, so pretty.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's kind of a way to get your childhood out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. I have so much fun going to antique shops and looking at dresses and buying things online and crowns on Amazon and everything like that. So it's definitely a lot of fun. It's something that I really love.
I have so many questions about the nitty-gritty of a photo shoot and all that stuff. But first I want to ask your career history, because it's very interesting. A very interesting turnaround that you've done. So I would love to hear about your whole, whatever you're comfortable sharing, but your history that got you to this point.
Yeah, so I've always loved doing photography. I think I grew up with a camera in my hand. My earliest memories are making very cringy photo shoots and music videos with me and my cousin. We were going through our angry teenage phase. So there's all of these videos that are still on YouTube because I can't remember the username of how to delete them or the password or anything. So they're all on YouTube somewhere of her in the back garden singing. But I refound my love for photography. I think after I'd gone to school and I'd done my A-levels, I think I saw a lot in my friends that we kind of went through the formal education and got sidetracked in a way from our creative goals, so thinking that we needed to get a real job. But I noticed a pattern was that when we got that little bit older, so when I got to 21, we kind of reconnected with the things that we should have been doing all along but maybe didn't have the confidence to do. So I went back to college and I studied there and I refound my love for photography. It all made sense. But at the same time, I was working part-time in a GP surgery. So I work for the NHS. I work as a receptionist. Well, I did work as a receptionist on the desk. So yes, I'll touch in a little bit about the reasons behind why I decided to stop and what happened when I left. But I was also studying a HND at the time, and my last year of my HND I wanted to focus on studying, I wanted to focus on working as much as I could, so I decided to leave that job for that year because I had my student loan, so I was covered in regards to finances. Now I've actually gone back, so I am doing a teaching qualification at the moment at the same college that I studied at, so that's really interesting to see that other side of it. And I'm also doing coding, so I'm very busy, but I do still have my photography as my part-time business, and I still love it as much as I do. It's a little bit of a juggling act at the moment, to be honest.
So you're working right now and photography is part-time. Is your goal to eventually do photography as a full-time thing, or do you intend for it to always be part-time? What's your plan with that?
I would love photography as a whole to be full-time, but I think if I was looking at doing freelance 24/7, I know myself and I know that I would fall out of love with it. Obviously, when you're working freelance as well, there is that instability. So my goal long-term is to split it in the middle between teaching and lecturing, whether that's a freelance business in itself or I'm working for an institution, and then having the commercial business where I'm doing the weddings and the families and all of that stuff.
So you mentioned that you work with companies and clients. How does that compare to, for you as a photographer? I don't know anything about the photography space, so I would love to hear about overall the photography space and especially what that looks like, the difference between freelance, personal, client, customer, what that difference is.
So do you mean the difference between working as freelance and as part, a staff photographer, or just the difference between,
like, or whatever the thing is I don't even understand the lingo. Like, I don't even know what the difference is. So however, like, your career has been working, the difference between working for like a wedding versus working for like a company versus just doing your own stuff, like, what do those differences look like financially, creatively? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, so I would say that the commercial side of it very much does fund the creative side. So in regards to a wedding, or say for example if I was shooting a client like a family photo shoot or a maternity photo shoot, there is that element of pressure there, and it's something that I really love for a different reason, which I'll touch on in a second. But yeah, I think the personal work, it's just me having fun with my friends. It's how I started photography, was just in a field somewhere, covered in mud, probably freezing cold. And yeah, I'm really thankful that the commercial side is able to fund that fun side. The reason why I have such a split, I think, is because when I was looking at quitting my job, so as I said, I worked in a GP surgery, and I think over time, if you work in that kind of environment and you work on the phones, there's a similar kind of the same kind of people will phone in. So it's either usually people who need the service, unfortunately, they're obviously not in a very good way, or their families as well. So I would have these really sort of heart-wrenching conversations. For example, I had this way too many times where someone would phone me up and they would say, I feel like my mental health is so bad, I'm struggling so badly, I don't know what to do, I don't know what the services are like out there, but I feel like if I don't get help now, then I'm going to go down a really bad path. But then in the same way, I also feel like I don't know if I'm bad enough, and you know, people have it so much worse than me. And I would have that conversation multiple times. Or it could be something like a palliative patient, so someone who is at the end of their life and is going to die. So you're talking to their families, and then you pick up the phone when the inevitable has happened. And I think with that job, what I really loved about it was what I did mattered. And even if those people didn't remember me, even if those people didn't remember the conversation that we had, what I said and how I showed up really mattered. So when I left the job, I was looking at, originally I wanted to just work in fashion photography and do basically what my personal work is now. And I was very adamant that I would not be the photographer that would go in and do the odd wedding or the odd family shoot and then just completely sell out. And go and continue just doing that and not do my personal work as my career because the money was more available. And that's exactly what I did, but not just for the money. I think the first client that I had, it was a maternity shoot, and like I always do, I was panicking. Imposter syndrome is real. And I was full of anxiety and thinking, oh, you know, I've never done this before, and trying to plan it. And a couple of nights before we were to shoot, I was stalking her on Instagram, and I saw a post where she said that she had actually had a miscarriage, the pregnancy before the one that she was currently having. And she was filled with anxiety about what could potentially happen. And I think as a woman you can kind of empathise with that. I know I definitely can. And I just had this realisation where I was like, this isn't about me. This is more important than whatever it is that I'm worried about. And I need to show up in that way. And I felt like up until that point there was something missing when I was looking at it just being fashion and vintage style. That rewarding kind of feeling was missing. So I reframed it in a way, and I thought, okay, well, instead of maybe sharing the worst parts of someone's life with them, maybe I can share the best parts. I can share their weddings and their, you know, when they have babies, and there's going to be elements, you know, that are sad within that. But that's when I really changed, and I wanted to be maybe a little bit too emotionally involved with my clients. But to me, that was definitely worth it. and I've worked with people, and it's just like a conveyor belt of weddings. Like they're part of a team, and they maybe do 4 weddings, in a row, and they're completely tired, and they just don't care about the clients. And that's fine if that's, what you want out of photography, and it's just that finance that you're looking for, that's fine. But for me, it was much more important to have that emotional connection with my clients and to look at it that way.
Absolutely. That is so fascinating. I can definitely see where that parallel is drawn between working in a GP and having to be that kind of silent but very important role in people's lives and very hard times in their lives, and how that can translate to kind of doing the similar but opposite thing in photography. Like, people might not remember necessarily you, or at a wedding, I don't necessarily remember the photographer, but the photos are always going to be there and will always be, whether they're good or bad, is always a major part of those events. So that's so interesting that kind of mindset carries over to this job. Like, that's not something that I would ever really consider an overlap being between those two things. That's so interesting. Do you think this is more meaningful as a job than your previous, than that experience or anything else you've done as a photographer?
I think they're just different, to be honest. I think, again, it's the different levels of stress as well are different. So obviously when you're freelance, it's just you, and there are so many things that can go wrong. But then also if you're part of an institution like in the UK we have the NHS, or GP surgery, then there's added stress on that because it's on such a bigger scale. But it is just different. I mean, the GP surgery is over now. I don't really want that relationship with the patients anymore, because I feel like I get it from my photography. I get to speak and just get to know people that I wouldn't otherwise. And like you said, just know them in a really intimate way. Whether they remember me or not, I'm a part of their lives, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, I love that. That is so, that's such a fun way to think about it. As a traditional artist, one of my favorite things, especially about this podcast and my YouTube channel, is having that relationship with people. I'll get these messages that you've inspired me, you've made me pick up art again, and it's that connection that really makes it feel very worth it. And I'm not necessarily working one-on-one like you do. Sometimes I'll get commissions for maybe deceased family members. I'm painting a portrait of them, and just knowing that I get to be there for that client and do that for them, and in any way kind of make an impact in their life, is so rewarding. And I can only imagine getting to do that very one-on-one, being there for that moment for them must be so exciting. Yeah,
it's absolutely lovely. And that is, I think part of being online as well is you get people who message you and say that you've inspired them, and you're like, well, I didn't even expect this. Obviously you put yourself out there, hoping that would be the case. But when people actually reach out to you and have concrete things of ways in which you've helped them, it's a little bit surreal, definitely.
Absolutely. So kind of changing gears a little bit, I mentioned I don't know anything about photography. I would love to know how much of, first of all, I love your commercial stuff. For the jewelry companies, I don't care about jewelry photos. And then I saw yours and I was like, I want to buy this stuff. It's so beautiful. But when you're doing your creative work, so you mentioned you go to the antique shops and you buy stuff. Is literally all of it you? The makeup, are you directing literally everything? Is that your job as the photographer? Or are you kind of just taking pictures? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, because the jewelry imagery is actually my weakest, and I never would have thought of it that way. I think because you compare yourself to the professionals who have the studios and everything. So honestly, that is the biggest compliment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You do amazing work. You convinced me. I think you could convince me to buy just about anything.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. So I think when you're first starting out in photography, you have got to be a bit of a one-man band, so you've got to do everything. But I think the wonderful thing about photography, and specifically fashion or fine art photography, is that team aspect.
Yeah.
So as I've been growing, I've realised that if it's my personal work, then I'm probably going to have a lot more control over it, and I'm going to have a lot more input in the ideas. But at the end of the day, I am a photographer. It's not my job to do everything. And the truth is, the way to elevate your work is to work with people that specialise in that area. Yeah. So, if we look at it, for example, if, it comes to a TV company. They don't hire one person to do everything. They hire specialists to do each individual thing because they know that they're going to get the best outcome. So I would say probably a year in, I started working with people, and I would just find them on Facebook. To begin with, it was students, that were looking for photographers for their projects. And I have made wonderful friendships now with hair artists, makeup artists, these really talented people, designers. And I just think it takes your work to that next level. Yeah. And it's so inspiring as well to work with them, because they have skills that I could only, dream of having. And then obviously you get the clients that you work with. For example, you might have someone who creates jewellery or, creates a planner or something like that. And that in itself is a really good connection, because I often work with smaller businesses. Again, that emotional connection is really important to me. So I'm more likely to work with a smaller business compared to a large one, just because I can emotionally connect more. But we're all women in business, we're all startups, we have a lot in common, and we learn a lot from each other as well. So again, I think that's another element of that connection and that emotional building with other people. But yeah, definitely teams, I love working in them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that, the way you describe, you're all women, you're all startups, and you're all small businesses. That's so fun. That sounds like such a fun environment to work in. That sounds like the dream. That is so cool. Yeah. Is there any project or group or team that you've worked on or with that stands out as your best experience?
Let me have a think. I think there is one particular person. So can I shout her out or just say her name on there? Is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's one particular person, Miriam Bibby. So she's a hair and makeup artist. We met, like I said, she was a student, and then we met and we worked together. And I think we just get on so well that we were friends from the beginning. And one thing that I really love about photography as well is I was so shy when I started. I would not talk. I was so reserved, and photography was really great for me because it forced me to get out of my comfort zone, and it was my job to make the person I was taking photos of feel comfortable. Again, it wasn't about me and what I was worried about. Yeah, so I think Miriam and I met at a really pivotal time, and I just remember this recent photo shoot that we had. So it was me, a model who was a friend as well. We had a dress from a designer. It was very avant-garde, very beautiful. I'll send you a photo so you can put it on screen if you want to. Yeah. And it was just so creative, and we just had fun. We were just, in the city centre, we just laughing all day, and it was personal work, but obviously that lends itself to your portfolio, so then you can approach other people with it. And it just reminded me of my photo shoots when I started, when it was fun. So I think that was the latest photo shoot I did, and my favourite. Maybe just every photo shoot that I do at the time is my favourite. But yeah, that was definitely a fun day, and we just laughed the whole day.
That's awesome. I would love to work with a photographer at one point, because it sounds like it's just such a fun, intimate, but casually intimate experience. Just hang out with creative people and create something collaboratively. That sounds so fun.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely. I would recommend it.
Kind of changing gears again, going back to kind of the business aspect. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the idea of starting a business as a non-business oriented person, which I think that describes me. With my business, I am very much a go with the flow, whatever happens, happens. I'm planning, but I'm not worried about it necessarily. I'm just doing what I can. And how has that gone for you? Are you similar? Are you different?
I am definitely on the more laid back side, but to be honest, I think mine probably comes more from that lack of self-belief and maybe a little bit of avoidance as well.
Gotcha.
So I was really lucky that I worked with a company. They're a charity organisation, and they offer business mentorship. So I did have a little bit of guidance and someone forcing me to kind of make goals. But, if it was up to me, I think I'd be, very much go with the flow. Yeah. And I can say it's worked for me for what I personally need. It's created a business that I love rather than one that I resent. And that's what photography is for me. It's, you know, like I said, something that I want to be emotionally involved in. Has it limited me in certain ways? I'm sure. I think obviously you are going to be limited to a certain extent if you're not planning and very methodical. Right. But I think it's all about what you want and what you want out of it. And you can definitely get there. And I think a lot of people are like us. It's common sense that we will be drawn to the people that are very methodical and organised. Like, I know I watch so many YouTube videos of people like Plan With Me and productive vlogs and all of those things. Yeah. And I always say it's natural for us to be drawn to those people because they want what we have. But the truth is that, you know, especially online, we can very easily compare ourselves to people where it looks like it's perfect and just that upward trajectory all the time. Yeah. It's not always like that. There are going to be delays, and even the people that you look to that seem to have this like amazing quick growth and nothing ever goes wrong, I can guarantee that behind the scenes there have been ups and downs. Yeah. So yeah, I'm more laid back, I will say, overall.
I think the thing about being in a creative career is, like, I think a lot of creative people tend to be kind of that go with the flow. I'm not a math person. Not that business is like intrinsically like math, but like I can barely do like regular mental math. And so like when it came to like taking this seriously as a career and thinking about taxes, like I was like, hey mom, what are taxes? Like, how do taxes work? Like having to think about like projected growth and how am I going to achieve this goal was just really, really hard for me, and it took the fun out of it a lot. Like, there are some ways that kind of looking at your channel growth or looking at, you know, how much money you made, when it's a good number, it's encouraging and it's exciting. But a lot of ways it was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to make art and like enjoy it, and I don't want to, like you said, like it lets you foster a career that you love rather than loathe. And I think if I worried too much about that stuff, I would end up hating it. Like, that's kind of why I didn't go to art school, is I didn't want to end up like hating it. I didn't want there to be all these rules and needed numbers and all this stuff. And so I think having that like laid back mentality really helps foster like a genuine love and appreciation for your career. But like you said, there's definitely limitations. There's a lot of things that I feel like maybe I haven't grown as quickly as I could because I didn't care about certain aspects of the career. And there's ways that maybe I could have been making more money and I could be supporting myself earlier if I did certain things. And it's such a weird balance. And if Kelsey were here, I think she's kind of the opposite of us, where she's very goal-oriented. She's really great at planning. She's really good at numbers. She loves analyzing stuff, and I think she would have some great insight. But I know for me, it's very much like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And it's really hard to like force yourself to kind of do that stuff. And I think that's one great thing about like working, like you talking about working with a team, is kind of in this scenario where you get to interact with other artists and learn from other people, and like we get to talk, and when we've interviewed other people, having that perspective of like, what do these people do that I can kind of learn from in a way that doesn't necessarily feel the same as like having to do math. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally relate. And I think I very much got discouraged at first. I'm not the kind of person to give up on anything. I think that's the reason why I didn't. But I launched my freelance business in April of 2020, and it was a face-to-face business. It was a very interesting choice. But I think because of that, around that time when I didn't really have the clients coming in, it was kind of a rough start, to be honest. And obviously there was a lot of expenses going out and not much going in, and I did get discouraged, and it just felt like I was spending all of my time on my computer setting up things like business bank accounts, and I didn't understand anything like insurance or contracts or anything like that. And I, you know, did resent it for a while, because I just felt so lost, and I just, like, I'm exactly like you, like my brain just didn't work that way. But what's so interesting now is I am deciding, so I'm doing my teaching qualification, and I'm deciding what I want to teach, and funnily enough, I'm landing on the professional practice. And I think the reason is because for so long I kind of wanted to know that stuff, but I didn't know where to start, and my brain didn't work that way. So now that I've got a little bit of knowledge behind me, I'm not, you know, whoever business I'm not a business guru, but I'm getting there, and I know a lot more. And I remember one of, my models, she actually, the jewellery business that we were talking about the photos with one of them, she started a business, and she was asking me for advice, and I at this point still felt very bad about myself and felt like I don't know anything. But I was saying, okay, if you want to make a logo, then you need to go on this website because it's going to be free rather than paying for it.
Right.
And then once you make this much money, that's when you have to register, and you need to keep records of your finances. And then I think that was really good, because it was kind of like, oh, okay, I do know a little bit.
Yeah.
I might not know everything, but I'm getting there. And I think that is one thing I would tell people as well. If you're at the beginning and you don't understand anything about that stuff, don't worry. You will get there. It's hard, especially for creative people, but it will sink in eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, that beginning stage, it's one thing that is really frustrating as someone who is not, like, we don't have that mind that lends itself to learning those things or understanding those things or knowing where to start, is like that feeling of like, yeah, where do you start? Because there's so much stuff that, like, no one, like, even if I were to Google it, like, I wouldn't get it. Like, there were so many things that, like the business accounts and taxes and insurance and needing to, like, do you need an LLC for this? And, like, how does this work if you work with a contractor? Or you need, like, if you need what counts as a business expense? And even things that I didn't know, like, the fact that having professional headshots would have been really nice to know, because even now I'm too lazy to get them. So every time any company needs a headshot, I'm like, oh, let me go take a picture really fast. And, like, getting, like, a logo. Like, I didn't think about, like, when would I need to worry about, like, a logo or, like, branding. Having a set branding would have been great to know in the beginning. And especially, like, I think for a lot of people who are creatives and kind of maybe a little bit more similar to my path than yours, where I kind of stumbled into it, I didn't necessarily set out to, like, have a career, is it kind of happens over time, and you're, like, not realizing that you're turning into a business, and it's like you don't have the chance to, like, realize, oh, I need a logo, oh, I need branding, because it's been a year, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm already a business and I didn't do any of that stuff. But there's so much of that stuff in the beginning that, like, you don't think about, and you don't realize that you would need, and you don't know how to do that until a company is talking to you, and you're like, I don't know what any of these words mean, and you have to Google it, and it's so stressful. So that's awesome that you're gonna, like, be teaching that stuff, because I'm sure it's gonna help you understand better, and it'd be great to have people deliver that information.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people have taken to YouTube, to be honest. That's why I love this podcast, because you talk about the things like sponsorships and all of the behind the scenes, the things that I'm interested in, but I wouldn't know where to start with. It is one of those things, I think, a lot with business, especially when it comes to pricing and charging and those kinds of things. No one talks about it.
Yeah.
And it is a negotiation process, and I know for me it can be so overwhelming that I don't even want to get started, because where do you start?
Yeah.
And that was definitely, when I started my channel, my goal was to show the getting the business bank account and showing the first difficult things. I wanted to kind of document what I went through as I was going through it. And there were things that, are hard as well, like when, you have your first client that doesn't like their photos. That's really difficult. And that's one thing that I like to try and share, and that I think that's why I'm drawn to this podcast, is the truth behind it and sharing all of those things as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is a great time to plug your YouTube channel.
Okay.
If viewers, if you would, or listeners, if you would like to hear more about that kind of behind the scenes stuff, check out Chloe's YouTube channel. I do want to mention, you mentioned contracts, and I think this is a great time to talk about, I have a question about, like, how was it learning? Contracts are so difficult. Like, they are so scary, and especially if you're working with, like, companies who already, they have a legal team, they know this stuff already, and it's just like you, and you've, like, worked with one company before. And I can only imagine photography, clients, companies, it's got to be a lot of information that you need to put in there. How was that process, learning how to do that?
So, a little bit of truth. So when I first had my first client, I didn't really know what to do in regards to contracts. So I'd heard other photographers talking about it and the things that you needed to include, but I didn't understand any of, like, the legal jargon or actually anything to include. I felt a little bit overwhelmed, so I just kind of avoided it. And I made this contract that was so basic, like, not many words at all, and me and the client relationship didn't really work out. I wasn't quite what they were looking for, and I remember being so terrified because I was like, they could, sue me. I've got nothing to say, nothing to cover me to say. If you don't like the photos, this is what is going to happen. Right. So it's definitely something to look into. I think I have over time just sort of molded a contract and gone to different sources and thought about the things that I need to include in it. But it is definitely a must. As soon as you're sending over, you're asking for deposits or you're booking a date, you need to be sending over a contract. And I think just, again, having that network of either other photographers, other business owners really helps. And then obviously that legal sort of help if you need it. But it is a complete minefield, and we're not lawyers, but we're expected to understand all this stuff. It's so confusing.
Yeah, I definitely think that's me and Kelsey's goal, as as we talked about, and I love that you're doing that on your channel, is sharing that information. I think that is the best tool for creative and freelancers, is being able to learn that from other people who are maybe a step further down the road than you. Is when I was doing commissions, well, I am currently, but when I was making up my commission information, there's it's not as serious. I don't think anyone's gonna sue me, but I definitely have to protect myself that someone could demand money back that I don't have to give them or whatever, and treat me unfairly or steal my work. And being able to look at other artists who had that information available or who talked about it and how to work that contract, it was great to learn from them and slowly piece it together. And I think a lot of it does come from experience, having to learn it over time. Because not everyone's is going to be the exact same, but I think being able to learn from each other, like you said, YouTube is amazing. Having that wealth of knowledge is just so vital. I think it really makes a difference, and I think it's great for creatives.
And you do learn over time, that client wasn't going to sue me, and they never would have even thought of it. But it's that what if, and you've got to be prepared. It's better to be prepared for the worst case scenario than to not be and be caught out, because you never know. You're working with essentially strangers. Not to scare anyone, but
you never know.
But you never know. No, so I think that communication is really important. Talking to other people. I'm sure there are Facebook groups for whatever industry, creative industry you're in. If you just put something, what do you include in a contract? That communication and can be really, really helpful.
As someone who kind of had to learn it over time and stuff, is there anything that going back you would you think it's really important to know from the beginning that you wish you knew in hindsight?
I think for me, just the imposter syndrome was the biggest hurdle for me. And I remember there being a time, that beginning time, where I just didn't know if it was ever going to get better. And I really wish that someone, me from the future, could have come back and said, you're going to get through this, or, give up. Because, it was very difficult. And like I said, I started at a very, interesting point. Yeah. But I would just say, if you're struggling right now with, anything, business, it will get better. You will gain confidence. The first time I sent the contract, obviously, first of all, like we said, I didn't do a very good job. And second of all, it was so daunting and so scary, and now it's just something I send. I don't even think about it. I just check it over and send it. So I would just tell people, if you're scared of something, obviously use your intuition. There are some times where, you're going to learn that certain clients, have certain red flags or something like that. Just don't give up. Just keep going, and it will get easier. That's what I wish I would have known when I started, to be honest.
I totally feel you. I think there's a lot of things that when you're starting out and you're doing all these big daunting things, it can feel so the end of the world every time, and it's so stressful. And it's once you're a little bit more seasoned and you kind of know what you're doing, it's it's not that deep. You can relax. Just have fun. Obviously learning that that experience is really important. But having someone, if I could go back and tell younger me hey, just have fun. Try a little harder. Just enjoy it. I think that would have benefited. I think that would benefit a lot of young artists. So I think that's great advice. If you're kind of in the beginning stages of your career, you'll be fine. Eventually, you'll be fine. So with this kind of winging it approach, with not really being super planning oriented, how does your marketing strategy look compared to do you think that it would be different? Do you how's that working for you?
So I think with marketing, it's very much based on me. So I do a lot of content marketing, and I know just personally myself that I'm much more drawn to the person rather than the business. I know, each individual person will differ, but I find that that's the case for most people, and I imagine that it links in quite a lot to the fact that I like to be emotionally connected to my clients as well. I want them to hire me, not just a photographer. So I don't have a very strict plan for better or for worse. I mean, people do find me, and sometimes I think, how did you find me? I don't know, when people say they find me on Google, I remember one of my clients said that, and I was like, oh, it worked.
Cool.
So it's just a lot of content marketing, putting myself out there, and then also just referrals as well, to be honest, with photography. Obviously, if you do someone's wedding and you make a good impression, then they're going to refer you on. But to be honest, I don't have a 5-stage plan. That is something that I'm looking at implementing a little bit, but I like the fact that I kind of just go with the flow. I don't know if you're the same with that, or...
No, I agree. I kind of feel the same way, because I think it leads to, not that being super planning and doing aggressive marketing is bad, but for me, and for someone who also enjoys that connection that you have with the audience and with your clients, I think it leads to a bit more of an organic experience when the growth is more natural, when the marketing is more natural. Like, it feels a little bit more, like, in my opinion, for me, I think it feels a bit more real, and I think it feels a bit more like my own, rather than... oh, I paid for this advertisement to go out, and I paid enough money that enough people saw it statistically to get a client. You know what I mean? Yeah,
it's more about the people than the numbers, I suppose. And I think that's what's great about this talk, is maybe we've opened up the idea of a business, and it doesn't have to be all go, 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 or what people think that it needs to be successful. There's lots of in-between, between roaring success and full-time business and making loads of money, and then also failure. I think there's a lot of people in the middle, and it just depends on what works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, is that like there's no one set way to do things, and I think on YouTube you can see a lot of people who do like super successful, and they talk a lot about productivity and marketing and planning and how to make money and all this stuff, and that's awesome, and that's super helpful information. And then there's a lot of people who kind of like, they might fail, their business might not work out, and like you said, there's a lot of people in between, and I think all of those are fine and all of those work, and having that mentality that you don't have to be any which way or go in any direction is really helpful, and I think it lets you enjoy the experience a little bit better. Takes off a lot of pressure, I think.
Yeah, and we started these businesses to have fun, to do something that we love. We don't want to end up being on that conveyor belt, not enjoying it and, resenting it. So it's just what depends on what you want from it, really.
Absolutely. So because you've taken this approach, which I think we've come to the consensus that it's for the better, but do you feel like there is anything you might have missed out on, or it set you back at all to kind of wing it? Like, is there any like major experience that you've seen other photographers they had early on in their career that you didn't get to have, or anything like that?
I think just the level of growth, and I think comparison is very, very, very easy to do, especially online. Like, I know I've had people who have messaged me and said, oh, you everywhere, like you look like you're doing so well, and I'm like, well, first of all, I've been really not busy, and second of all, it's been like the worst point of my life. Right. But yeah, I think just a level of growth. Like, I know that if I had done things differently, if I'd maybe taken more opportunities, if I'd maybe marketed better, then I would have more people through the door. And it is one of those that you've got to consider, okay, am I willing to make that sacrifice? For me, it's okay, because it reaches my goals. Right. And I think you could constantly live in the land of, oh, what could have been, what could I have done? Yeah. But yeah, I think sometimes I'm like, oh, if I was a little bit more on the ball, if I was a little bit more planned and more productive, then I could probably get more out of it. But I'm not overly fussed, to be honest.
I feel the exact same way. Like, like in hindsight, like, oh, I could have tried a little bit harder, but I didn't, and here's where I am, and I'm not in a bad place, and I think I should just be grateful for that. Yeah,
definitely. That gratitude, I think that is something that I definitely lost at the beginning, because there is a lot of added pressure. So just remembering to be grateful for my business, for the fact that I have a client who will pay me to go out, or that my job is going to go and buy costumes, like period costumes, and I can write that off on my tax return. That in itself, I think a year ago, or however long it was in between, that would have been wow, like that's the dream, or just breaking even would have been like my dream, and now if I'm not making so much, I'm putting all this pressure on myself. So that gratitude is very, very important as well, and being able to look back as well as look forward.
Absolutely. Speaking of looking forward, you mentioned you had that 5-step plan. Do you have any main goals for this? We're almost to the end of the year. Do you have any upcoming goals for 2023, or like your next 5 years, anything that you're kind of picturing that you want to work on, you want to focus on?
So I think the teaching is very, very interesting. It's a new challenge. It's a completely different skill.
Yeah.
And I have, had an element of teaching. I've done in-person workshops, and obviously on YouTube there is an element of teaching. But the difference between talking to a computer screen where you can edit things out and standing in front of a group of teenagers with them expecting something from you, I've only been doing it really my own lessons for like 2 weeks, so it's very fresh, and I don't I'm still getting the hang of it, definitely. But I love it. I think it's a really positive challenge. I feel like, I imagine it's the same, well, it would be the same with you and art. Like photography, I think came pretty naturally to me, whereas teaching is a completely different skill, and it's building back up. And then I don't know where I'm going to take that, whether I'm going to want to teach in an institution, or whether I'm going to maybe put that into Patreon or something like that. But that is my main focus for the time being, and just getting all of the experience that I can with weddings, because I think that industry, having your 1 foot in the industry, 1 foot teaching, is going to be really helpful for the students as well, because obviously you're giving them up-to-date knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Being able to, continuing to work in the field, I think would be really, and I would love that from a teacher, being able to see them actively like do stuff and know that they're like out there and not just like, oh, I learned this information, I'm going to repeat it to you. That's awesome. I think that's a great goal. That sounds really exciting.
What are your goals for 2023?
Oh, I don't know yet. I've been thinking about it. I think I really want to... So this is going to be my first year, like... I feel like I say this every year, but this is my first, like, year where I'm going in with nothing else on my plate. Like, I'm not going to school for anything. I don't have a part-time job. I'm not necessarily looking for a part-time job, at least for, like, the first half of the year. So it's going to be my first, like, year where there's no other responsibility. So my main goal is just going to be, like, to really, like, try to be a bit more business-oriented and try to, like, get all my ducks in a row and figure out a way to make this, like, a very solid career, which, as a non-business person, it's going to be hard. But I think that's my goal. I don't necessarily have, like, anything that I'm working towards right now, which is new for me. I feel like there's usually something that I'm, like, working towards, so that'll be interesting.
I imagine, is Kelsey motivating for you to be more business minded, or?
Absolutely. Kelsey has really like taught me a lot. She's really good at like, anytime I've ever had a question about anything, like I'll like text Kelsey like, give me your thoughts. Like I just don't know like how this works, and we'll like kind of compare notes on like talking to companies, and it's having that perspective has really opened up my mind, and I think nudged me more in that direction. It's been really nice to have that influence, because I'm just not that way. And so getting to hear her perspective on things has definitely, I don't think it's like changed the way I work things. It's definitely like, what's the word? Educated the way I do things, I think, a little bit. And I can still kind of do it my way while having, you know, she has my back and she knows more about those things than me. And that's nice to know.
Yeah. Yeah. She sounds like a good friend.
She is a good friend. She's a really good friend. That's one thing that's been great about being a creative on this space. You touched about, like, you made your friend Miriam, right? Yeah. Yeah, like, I got that with Kelsey. Like, she emailed me, and we became friends, and it's so great to have someone in that same space that you can learn from and work with, and I think that's great about, you know, the online art community. And I would imagine, I don't think that they're necessarily the same circle, but I imagine, like, photography and fine art kind of overlap in that sense, and I think it's so cool, the people that you get to meet, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And we're all, you know, creative-minded, so we've all got something in common. And what is funny is we were talking about them overlapping. I'm actually doing a lesson tomorrow on fine art photography, so
fun.
There we go. Our worlds are kind of meeting.
Yeah, they're kind of meeting in the middle there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was all I had. Thank you so much for coming, Chloe. I think we had an amazing conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. It was really interesting to hear about, like, the photography perspective. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and likewise, I learned so much, and it's so nice to be able to relate to someone that is of the same mind and isn't necessarily super analytical or numbers driven. So thank you for this conversation, and thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Make sure you check out Chloe on YouTube, check out her website. If you are in the London area, hire her, and rate the podcast 5 stars wherever you're listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.